I come from Northern Ireland. I lived there in the 70s, and there were a lot of artists who were making work about a very difficult political situation, who were trying to come to terms with the politics of Northern Ireland and the sectarian violence in Northern Ireland through their artistic practice. And knowing that they were concerned with socio-political issues, I was interested to see how that would transfer to a Pittsburgh context and an American context.
My formative years growing up in Belfast inform my work clearly. And the entire civil rights movement in Northern Ireland was inspired by the African-American civil rights movement in America. And a lot of the work here echoes that kind of duality or that inspiration. This exhibition is particularly interesting opportunity to bring the souvenir shop, a project that I've been working on in Ireland for the past few years, to a Pittsburgh audience. And I'm making products and making artworks that fit into a shop context, looking at life in America. I chose very particular items, and then I made interventions or I remade them as other things. And there's always that socio-political comment. Okay, the real kind of impulse or drive behind this work is a desire to actually contribute to some great, grand, global consciousness. I think politics in America at the moment is, to say the least, worrying. And I like to think of art as a force for change, a force for kind of collective good, a universal language that somehow points us in the right direction.
I mean, when I was brought up, I think there was a kind of a civil war, an undeclared civil war, but the functions of the state were contested at every level in this space, that culture didn't really matter to people, that it wasn't, it wasn't a significant thing. I was interested in these sort of stands behind me that are a form of pitching device, a form of sign making, a way of proposing an idea, and often I didn't think they were very interesting. So I was interested in whether I could reappropriate them to carry this idea of a pitch, but the pitch also being a form of trajectory, and so the Pennsylvania regiments in the First World War were also, and the Pittsburgh regiments were artillery and infantry. So that arc of an idea and the arc of a kind of a march across landscape. So the challenges are about how you make something that might register or matter, and figuring out who that might matter to. What are those things that you see, or those things that you learn and how you learn them, that really land or linger?
My work has become synonymous with work about the Troubles, and that really has influenced the trajectory of my career. Some of the commonalities in this work would be that in terms of its formal properties, it's quite similar to the work I've made in the past. I've continued to make a series of bruised busts, which reside quite firmly within the classical realm, but they hark back, but also they kind of vibrate in the contemporary. Upon first glance, you think it's a classical bust, but then the bruises and wounds begin to appear and reveal themselves. But how it differs is that in terms of its context, what the work is about. For this exhibition, I've made a series of African-American busts, and I wanted to speak to, in some oblique way, ask a series of questions about the Black Lives Matter campaign, which I'm kind of acutely interested in. A lot of the work is about the abuse of power, and within a Northern Irish context, that happens quite a lot. But also, it can make sense out of that context within multiple international arenas. I have a series of embroideries that are about politicians from all over the world who are caught fighting in Parliament. That, I think, reads in a local context and an international context. So yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to work with the Mattress Factory, spending time developing work in a way where I've been encouraged and supported to take risks.
The troubles in Ireland does come under the work, but not in the same way whatsoever. There's a kind of, maybe there's a flashback type of element that happens within it as one of the layers within the piece. At the start I was thinking maybe I'm not going to be able to do this because I couldn't come to Pittsburgh, and then after a while I started to think differently about it, and I thought I do work happens quite close to me, like in my immediate terrain. I use it as subject matter for producing pieces of work. So if I couldn't get here, I couldn't figure out, well, how can I do it? How can I do pieces of work sticking true to myself for the way I work? The fireplace was like really good. It's a sort of starting point for sparking it, because it relates to the light box that I've got here. There's a fire track on the light box, so something started to happen that was interesting to me, you know. And even though I took the photographs in Derry, where I'm from, I thought they could have a relationship here, or they could stand here for something, perhaps something else. The process that I use, or it's given to me, it's like it is a surprise that when you notice something, you take a photograph, it surprises you. Something's, and these two pieces in the room, that's really the way that's come about, partly by chance, you know. So I'm not setting out looking for something that's fulfilling an idea or a concept. They just happen.
My early years in Northern Ireland studying art, a lot of us were frustrated by our inability to make any kind of art response to the political situation. Something that has cropped up in my work from the very beginning has been some reference to food. It can have a strong cultural significance, but also it's something that we share, and I find that a very significant, a very important thing in social dialogue, is the sharing of food, traditionally the breaking of bread together. The main challenge of the project was the way the Mattress Factory like to work, and they like artists to install pieces in the space. I'm making a fresco, a traditional wet lime plaster fresco, but my subject matter is Pittsburgh foodstuffs, things that pierogies and Caprani Brothers sandwiches, items of food that are very much related to Pittsburgh. And I see food as a great common denominator, something that brings people together. And a material that gives an image an instant aging, so it talks to you as if from another era. And I think I use that to reinforce that commonality of these foodstuffs that has always been with us.
My formative years in the north of Ireland really informed what I subsequently did as an artist. Seeing how the kind of daily ritual of violence was kind of played out on the streets there, and then also seeing how it was subsequently reported, definitely changed my attitude to kind of image making. And for me, that's one of the ongoing kind of issues or dilemmas around using photography. The idea of intrusion and feeling comfortable being in a place to work. So there were many kind of dynamics for me around making this work in Pittsburgh and Braddock. But those were the kind of challenges that I thought it would be interesting to try and understand in making the work. This is a kind of fiction set in a maybe not too distant future, which is concerned about the impact of pollution, air pollution, the decline of industry, and how the world might look. I was kind of disenfranchised from a process of making images of this place and describing how this place was understood and seen by the world. So that really motivated me as an artist to want to participate in this process of making images and developing the kind of dialogue and discussion and the language itself around how places like Northern Ireland are described and understood. So in some ways that has transferred into my decision to come here and make a work like this.
I would describe Paul Seawright as a photo artist. He's not necessarily interested in the kind of individual photographs, but in this case, there's a room, which has several photographs in it, and the photographs are creating an atmosphere. And the subject of the photographs is based on interviews he's been doing with American veterans from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. None of those people are depicted in the photographs, but there's an air of melancholy about the photographs. He's photographed the areas where he went to meet with these people, and so the installation, this room, creates a kind of atmosphere that causes us to kind of contemplate the situation of those guys. He's found out various facts and figures, and the fact is there are more than 70 suicides, veteran suicides in the USA in one day. In the year 2014, there were over 7,000 veteran suicides. Those are really disturbing figures, which have us wondering, about the state of those guys' lives when they return to America. Having left as heroes, they come back, into very difficult circumstances. A hero, Golly, a hero, Golly, a hero. Woo!